In the heart of Benue City, a wealthy businessman named Daniel stood on the edge of the most important decision of his life. He was about to sign a contract with Zenith Holdings, a deal that promised to take his company, Brightway Solutions, to greater heights. Millions of dollars were involved, and the boardroom was filled with confident whispers and early celebration. Daniel's childhood friend and longtime business partner, Patrick, sat beside him with a proud smile. Everyone believed the deal was sealed. But just as Daniel lifted his pen to sign, the door opened quietly. A young woman in a blue cleaning uniform walked in, pushing a cart. "Excuse me, sirs, let me quickly empty the bin," she said gently. Her name was Sandra, and no one paid her any mind, except Daniel, whose destiny was about to change. Sandra walked to the bin near Daniel's chair. "Where are you watching from today? Kindly hit like, comment, and subscribe to this channel for more." She bent down like she was fixing the trash bag, then leaned slightly and whispered just loud enough for him to hear. "Sir, don't sign. It's a trap." Daniel froze. His hand stopped, and the pen dropped from his fingers, rolling silently across the table. He turned sharply to look at her, shocked, but she simply stood up, nodded politely, and pushed her cart toward the door like nothing had happened. Confused, Daniel turned back to the room. "Is everything all right?" one of the Zenith executives asked. Daniel cleared his throat, still shaken. "Give me 5 minutes," he said, standing up. 5 minutes? Patrick asked with a raised brow. "Daniel, what's going on?" But Daniel had already walked out, his mind racing. He caught up with Sandra near the staff elevator. "You," he said in a firm, low tone. "Come with me." She hesitated for a second, then nodded quietly. He led her into a nearby break room and shut the door behind them. "Talk," Daniel said, crossing his arms. "And you better not be joking." Sandra held her trash bag tightly but didn't flinch. "I overheard some things while cleaning," she said. "Patrick and Zenith are working together to cheat you. The contract you're about to sign has been changed. If you sign it, you'll lose control of your company." Daniel's heart beat faster. "Do you have proof?" he asked. "Not here," she replied. "But I have everything, photos, voice recordings, documents. Meet me here at 7 tonight. I'll show you." He studied her, unsure whether to believe her. But something about her courage made him nod. 7 o'clock sharp. At exactly 7 p.m., Daniel returned to the break room. Sandra was already there, holding a small backpack. She looked calm, though her hands trembled slightly. "Thank you for coming," she said as he sat across from her. She opened her phone and tapped on a folder. 3 weeks ago, I was cleaning Mr. Patrick's office when I heard voices from the next room. He and a woman were talking about you." She played a recording. Though the sound wasn't perfect, the voices were clear. "Once he signs, we'll take control," said a man. "He won't realize until it's too late," added a woman. Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's Patrick, and Chica." Chica was his former girlfriend who had ended things years ago. The betrayal hit hard. "There's more," Sandra said, swiping through photos of forged contracts and hidden clauses. "They plan to switch documents at the signing table." Daniel stood up and walked to the window, staring at the glowing skyline of Benue City. "Patrick and I started this company with nothing," he said, more to himself than to her. "We built everything together." He turned to Sandra. "Why are you doing this? You could lose your job. You could lose everything." Sandra looked down, then met his eyes. "Because it's the right thing," she said softly. "And because I know what it feels like to be betrayed." Daniel watched her for a long moment. She had nothing to gain, yet she was risking everything. "And your sister?" he asked. "You said she was sick." Sandra nodded. "She needs surgery. The job helps cover her treatment. But I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't watch them destroy you." Daniel's voice was steady. "Tomorrow we fight back." The next morning, Daniel arrived at the office earlier than usual. The weight of Sandra's words and the evidence she had shown him kept replaying in his mind. He walked past the reception without a greeting and went straight to human resources. "I need to see the file of a staff member, Sandra," he told the HR officer, a woman named Madam Grace. She blinked. "The cleaning lady." "Yes," Daniel replied. "Just a routine check." Madam Grace handed him a thin file. Inside, Daniel found a resume that stopped him cold. Sandra, 30 years old, held a degree in business administration from Zambezi University, with experience in corporate finance and even 2 years at Omina Group, one of the top consulting firms in Africa. He looked up stunned. Why would someone like her be working as a cleaner? Later that day, Daniel found Sandra cleaning windows on the 12th floor. "We need to talk," he said gently. She turned, surprised but composed. "Is everything all right?" "I saw your file," he said. "Zambezi University. Omina Group. Corporate finance." Sandra sighed and looked away. "So now you know. Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel asked. "Because no one cares," she replied. "No one sees beyond the uniform. I've applied to over 20 jobs, but the moment they see I'm cleaning floors, they think I've failed." Daniel frowned. "But your qualifications are impressive." Sandra gave a sad smile. "That doesn't matter here. At Omina, I was passed over again and again, told I wasn't a cultural fit. I needed to take care of my sister, so I took whatever job I could get. That's how I ended up here." Daniel's voice softened. "You said your sister needs surgery. How bad is it?" Sandra hesitated, then replied. "She has a heart condition. The surgery costs $150,000. Our health plan covers part of it. That's why I can't afford to lose this job." Daniel's chest tightened. "Sandra, I didn't know. I wasn't expecting you to," she said quietly. "You're a CEO. I'm just a cleaner. But I couldn't stand by and let them ruin you the way they ruined me." Daniel studied her face. There was no pride in her voice, only sincerity. She had seen a betrayal coming and spoken up, even when she had everything to lose. "You've done more for me than most people ever have," he said. "And I won't forget it." That same afternoon, Daniel entered the boardroom for a follow-up with Zenith Holdings. Patrick greeted him with his usual charming grin. "So, are we ready to finalize the deal?" he asked. Daniel looked at him closely. "Actually, I'd like to review some clauses again. I'm not comfortable signing today." Patrick's smile twitched. "Come on, Daniel. We've been over this for months. What's changed?" "I just need one more night," Daniel replied, closing the contract and placing it back in his briefcase. "Tomorrow morning." "That's final." One of the Zenith executives stood up, visibly frustrated. "Delaying now could change the entire market reaction. You'll lose your advantage." Daniel remained calm. "Then so be it. I'm not signing anything under pressure." As he left the room, he noticed Patrick's smile fading, just a little. That evening, just as promised, Sandra returned to the same break room. She came prepared, with her phone fully charged and a stack of printed photos in a plastic folder. Daniel was already there, seated, waiting. "Show me everything," he said. Sandra began to explain how she had overheard conversations between Patrick and a woman named Chica. They were planning to change the contract at the last minute, she said, showing him 2 versions of the document. "Look at the control percentage. The version you reviewed gives you 60%, but this version leaves you with only 15%. Daniel's hands trembled as he examined the pages. "That's fraud," he muttered. "That's theft." Sandra nodded. "And there's more. I found payment transfers, millions of dollars, moved into Patrick's personal account last week. This isn't just betrayal. It's a full-scale setup." Daniel stood by the window, his hands buried deep in his pockets, staring into the quiet evening lights of Benue City. "I trusted Patrick with everything," he whispered. "We started Brightway Solutions from a single rented room 17 years ago." Sandra remained quiet, letting him process the weight of it. "Why would he do this?" Daniel finally asked. "Some people change when money is involved," she replied. Others were never who they claimed to be. You were just too loyal to see it. Her words cut deep, but they were honest. And Chica, Daniel added bitterly. I thought she left me to find herself. Turns out she found something else. Greed. Sandra placed the documents back in her bag. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. But now you know. Daniel nodded, the fire of betrayal beginning to harden into determination. We expose them. Tomorrow. The next morning, Daniel returned to the office early once again. This time he didn't go to HR or the boardroom. Instead, he went straight to the company's internal server room. With his CEO credentials, he accessed the most secure digital folders. There, hidden deep in encrypted archives, he found something chilling. An addendum labeled Asset Distribution, Confidential. When he opened it, he nearly dropped his laptop. According to the document, 85% of Brightway Solutions assets would be transferred after the merger, not to Zenith Holdings, but to a shell company named Zenith International Ventures. And listed as owners of that shell, Patrick and Chica. My God, Daniel whispered, staring at their names beside offshore bank accounts. They were planning to erase me completely. Daniel didn't stop there. He dug further, tracing financial transactions across the company's accounts. In the past month alone, over $7 million had been quietly moved from Brightway's main treasury into unidentified Zenith-linked accounts. But Daniel recognized something even more disturbing. The account numbers didn't match the original merger documents. They had been swapped. Fabricated records, he muttered. They were redirecting funds under the radar. Then came the final blow. An audio file stored by the office's automated security backup system. When Daniel played it, he heard Patrick's voice say, Daniel has no idea. Once he signs, we trigger the transition. Within 72 hours, he'll be out, and we'll be long gone. Chica responded with a laugh. That's what he gets for being so trusting. By midday, Daniel had compiled every piece of evidence. He backed up everything on 2 USB drives, emailed copies to his private accounts, and printed enough documents to hand out to the board. Then he sat alone in his office, thinking not about business, but about Sandra. She had nothing, no position of power, no connections, yet she had risked everything to warn him. Her courage had saved him from losing his company, his dignity, and perhaps even his future. He reached for his phone and typed her a message. Thank you for trusting me. I'll never forget what you've done. He didn't hit send. Instead, he stood up and prepared for the 2 p.m. emergency board meeting, the one where everything would be exposed. It was time to confront betrayal with truth. At exactly 2 p.m., the boardroom was filled with the company's top executives, legal advisors, and Zenith's representatives. Patrick was seated at the head, confident as ever, flipping through his notes. Chica sat beside him, dressed in sleek business attire, smiling at the directors like she owned the place. Daniel entered last, calm but firm, carrying a locked briefcase. Thank you all for coming, he began. Before we proceed with today's agenda, I'd like to introduce someone important to this company. Sandra. Gasps echoed around the room as Sandra stepped in, no longer in her cleaning uniform, but dressed professionally. What is this? Chica asked, her voice suddenly sharp. Sandra is here because she helped uncover something that concerns everyone in this room, Daniel said. Please let her speak. Sandra stepped to the front with quiet confidence. I was dismissed 2 days ago under false claims of misconduct, she began. But what I found could have ruined this company. She projected 2 versions of the same merger document onto the screen. This is the contract Daniel was shown, she said, pointing. Here, he keeps 60% control. Then she switched to the next slide. This is the real contract Patrick and Chica plan to submit for signing. In this version, Daniel is left with only 15% control. Shocked murmurs spread across the room. This can't be, one director whispered. I saw the documents myself. Then listen, Sandra said, and pressed play on the recording. Patrick's voice echoed. Once he signs, we trigger the transition. Within 72 hours, he'll be out. Chica stood up abruptly. This is illegal. These recordings were obtained without consent. Actually, Daniel cut in, they were captured by our internal security systems. Everything said on company property is subject to review during investigations. The room went dead silent. Sandra projected more evidence. Screenshots of bank transfers, offshore account statements, even emails between Chica and Zenith executives discussing how to push Daniel out quietly. This is treason, one of the board members said. Corporate betrayal at the highest level. Patrick tried to regain control. Let's not jump to conclusions. Anyone can forge documents. Then why do the signatures match yours? Daniel asked coldly. Why do the bank records trace directly to your private account in Morocco? The legal advisor for Brightway Solutions stood up. We need to alert the authorities. This is beyond internal discipline. Chica's face lost its color. You're making a mistake, Daniel. You're throwing away years of friendship. Daniel stood tall. No, Patrick. You threw it away the moment you decided to steal from me. Sandra handed the USB drive to the company's lawyer. Everything is here. The whole timeline of the fraud. The door opened, and 2 officers from Bennu Financial Crimes Unit stepped in. We received a report of corporate fraud, the lead officer said. Are Patrick and Chica present? No one said a word as the officers placed both in handcuffs. Chica screamed. This isn't over. But Daniel didn't flinch. Yes, it is. As the officers led Patrick and Chica away, the boardroom erupted into applause. For many, it wasn't just relief, it was respect. Daniel turned to Sandra and nodded. You saved us, he said simply. No, Sandra replied. You chose to listen. After the room cleared, Daniel stayed behind, sitting in silence. Everything he had built was still standing, but only because someone others had dismissed as just a cleaner had the courage to speak up. Later that evening, Daniel found Sandra in the lobby, preparing to leave. You're not going home just yet, he said. There's something I want to show you. She raised a brow. What is it? A new office. On the executive floor, he smiled. Sandra, I want you to be vice president of strategy. Sandra laughed softly, shaking her head. You're joking. I'm not, Daniel said seriously. You have the skills, the knowledge, and the integrity this company needs. She looked away, uncertain. I appreciate the offer, but people don't forget easily. They'll talk. Let them, Daniel said. You already earned more respect than most executives here ever will. Sandra met his eyes. This isn't about money, is it? It's about trust, Daniel replied. And second chances for both of us. She stood there for a moment, then smiled. All right, she said. Let's rebuild Brightway the right way. As they shook hands in the golden glow of the setting sun, Daniel knew one thing for sure. The right people don't always sit at the top. Sometimes they rise from the shadows and change everything. News of the arrests spread quickly throughout Bennu City's business circles. Several local newspapers ran headlines like, Brightway betrayal exposed by cleaner turned whistleblower. Sandra's name began to circulate, not as a cleaner, but as the woman who saved a $300 million company from collapse. Daniel, however, focused less on the noise and more on reforming the internal structure of Brightway Solutions. He appointed a new ethics committee, overhauled the finance team, and scheduled independent audits. Meanwhile, Sandra began her role as vice president of strategy, stepping into her new office on the 15th floor with quiet determination. Some employees still looked at her with confusion or doubt, but others greeted her with warm respect. She didn't ask for applause. She simply got to work. Despite her new role, Sandra's heart was still heavy. Her sister Miriam was scheduled for heart surgery in 2 weeks, and although Daniel had promised to assist, Sandra hadn't asked for help. That evening, as she sat in her apartment reviewing policy documents, Daniel called. Have you heard from the hospital? He asked gently. Not yet, she replied. Still trying to raise the rest of the money. Daniel paused. I made a donation this morning. Through an anonymous channel. The surgery is covered. Everything. Sandra's eyes welled with tears. Why would you do that? Because you deserve it. And because your sister shouldn't suffer because you did the right thing. There was silence between them, soft, warm, healing. Thank you, Daniel, she whispered. From both of us. The following week, Miriam's surgery went smoothly. Sandra sat at her bedside, holding her hand and reading softly as the young woman recovered. She hadn't told her sister the full story of how the operation was funded, only that someone kind had stepped in. One day, Miriam said, I hope I can be brave like you, Sandra. Sandra smiled, brushing her sister's hair gently. You already are. Across town, Daniel sat in his office, reading a profile piece titled, The Woman Who Cleaned the Truth. The article praised Sandra for her integrity and bravery. But Daniel knew the truth went deeper. She hadn't just saved the company. She had reminded him of what real leadership looked like. Not power. Not wealth. But principle, even when it's costly. 2 weeks later, Daniel invited Sandra to dinner at a quiet restaurant by Lake Abney. The air was cool, and the lights danced on the water's surface. You've done more in the past 14 days than some executives do in a year, he said as they waited for their food. Sandra smiled. Well, it's been a long time coming. I just needed a door to open. And you kicked it down, Daniel chuckled. The evening passed gently, filled with laughter, soft glances, and shared memories of old dreams. As they stood outside ready to part ways, Daniel looked at her and said, There's something growing here. I don't want to pretend I don't feel it. Sandra paused. Neither do I. But it's complicated. The best things usually are, he replied. Over the next month, Brightway Solutions began to thrive again. The company signed 2 major contracts and regained its reputation in the industry. Daniel often walked into the office earlier than usual, and more often than not, he would find Sandra already there, working with a mug of tea by her side. She had become the heart of the leadership team, focused, principled, and calm under pressure. One morning, as they reviewed documents together in his office, Daniel leaned closer. I've been thinking about that night at Lake Abney, he said. So have I, Sandra whispered. They didn't say anything more. But the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was rich with emotion, like something sacred was slowly taking root. One Friday evening, Daniel drove to the old part of Benue City, past the street vendors and the food stalls, until he reached a small rooftop cafe. Sandra was waiting for him there, in a simple but elegant dress. The sun was beginning to set, casting gold across the skyline. Beautiful view, Daniel said, sitting beside her. It is, she replied. And peaceful. They talked about everything, her dreams, his regrets, their plans for the company, and their hopes for the future. When it was time to leave, Daniel reached for her hand. I don't want to just build a company with you, he said softly. I want to build a life. Sandra looked down at their hands and then back at him. Then let's build it slowly, carefully, but together. Not everyone was happy about their closeness. Rumors swirled in the hallways, and a few old board members raised eyebrows. Isn't that the former cleaner? One of them whispered during a lunch break. Now the CEO is dating her. But Daniel didn't care. And neither did Sandra. They had built their connection on honesty and shared battles, not titles. One day, during a staff meeting, Daniel addressed it directly. Sandra Santos is vice president of strategy because she earned it, not because of me. And if anyone doubts that, they're free to leave. The room fell silent. After that day, no one questioned her right to be there again. At the end of that quarter, Brightway Solutions hosted its first all-staff town hall. Daniel stood on stage with Sandra beside him, both of them smiling as they announced the company's strongest financial results in 3 years. This quarter, Daniel said, was not saved by one person but by courage. By people who chose to speak when it would have been easier to stay quiet. He turned to Sandra and added, and by those who believed in what was right, even when no one else did. The crowd stood to their feet and applauded. That night, as they walked through the quiet halls after everyone left, Daniel turned to her. "Sandra, you saved my life." She smiled gently. "And you changed mine." As the months passed, their bond deepened. Sandra moved into a small but lovely apartment in the center of Benue City, close to the hospital where Miriam continued her recovery. Daniel visited often, sometimes bringing flowers, other times just to help with errands. They never rushed anything between them. No pressure, no spotlight, just shared time, quiet dinners, late-night strategy calls, and soft moments filled with mutual respect. When people asked Daniel if he was in love, he would smile and say, "It's more than love. It's gratitude, admiration, and peace." And that's exactly what it felt like, peace. The kind that comes after surviving a storm and finding someone who helped you walk through it. One chilly morning in December, Daniel invited Sandra for a walk along the river. She wore a wool coat and gloves, and he carried a flask of hot tea. As they reached a quiet bench beneath a tree with golden leaves, Daniel stopped. "There's something I've been meaning to ask," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. Sandra looked up, puzzled. Then she saw the small velvet box in his hand. "Daniel!" He knelt on one knee, smiling up at her. "Sandra Santos, you walked into my life pushing a cleaning cart and walked out of that boardroom saving my future. I want to spend the rest of my life walking beside you. Will you marry me?" Sandra covered her mouth, her eyes full of tears. "Yes, Daniel. Yes." The news of their engagement spread quickly, not through flashy announcements, but through quiet whispers of admiration. "The CEO proposed to the VP," someone said at the company cafe. "And she used to be a cleaner," another replied with pride. But the story was no longer just about surprise. It was about respect. Sandra and Daniel continued their work with the same focus and humility. Sandra insisted on no special treatment, no change in title, and no distractions from the work at hand. "We'll celebrate love outside the boardroom," she said. And Daniel respected that. "You're not just my fiancé," he once told her. "You're my equal, my strength." Miriam, now stronger than ever, was the happiest of them all. She had returned to her university classes and was studying to become a nurse. "I want to help people the way they helped me," she said one evening as Sandra helped her revise her notes. Daniel visited often, bringing food, supplies, and even helping with tuition. But more than anything, he brought presents. "He's the kind of man I want to marry one day," Miriam said teasingly to Sandra. "Then you better look for one with kind eyes and a stubborn heart," Sandra smiled, "because that's what Daniel is." The wedding was planned quietly, without media or social pressure. Sandra chose a modest dress made by a local tailor in Benue. Daniel picked a small botanical garden for the ceremony, simple, green, and peaceful. Only about 50 people were invited. Company staff, close friends, Miriam, and a few family members from both sides. On the wedding day, as Sandra walked down the garden aisle surrounded by flowers and sunlight, Daniel's eyes filled with tears. She looked like a queen, not because of jewels or silk, but because of who she had become. "You're breathtaking," he whispered when she reached him. "And you," she smiled, "are my home." The ceremony was filled with warmth, laughter, and tears. Reverend Bacco, a family friend of Sandra's late father, spoke about love that grows out of truth. Some relationships start with wealth, others with power. But the strongest ones, he said, are built on courage, forgiveness, and trust. When Daniel said his vows, he didn't just promise to love Sandra. He promised to listen to her, to respect her voice, to never forget how she changed his life with just a whisper in a boardroom. When Sandra spoke, she said, "You showed me that not all powerful men forget where they came from. And for the rest of our lives, I'll walk beside you, not behind." The wedding reception was held under open skies, with traditional drums, soft jazz, and homemade food served on wooden tables. There was no flashy display, just joy, dancing, and the unity of two lives becoming one. Miriam gave the toast. To my sister, she said, holding her glass high, who never gave up on doing what's right. And to Daniel, who didn't let his title stop him from hearing the truth. As the sun set, Daniel and Sandra danced slowly under fairy lights strung between trees. No press. No business talk. Just two people who had walked through fire and come out hand in hand. Weeks after the wedding, Sandra officially changed her name to Sandra Miller, but she kept her humility, her discipline, and her morning walks to the office. One Monday morning, a young intern approached her nervously. Vice President Sandra, he stuttered. How did you get here? From cleaning to here. Sandra smiled gently and pointed to a plaque on her desk that read, Do the right thing, even when no one sees. By doing the right thing, she replied. Even when it felt like it would cost me everything. The young man nodded, inspired. One day, I hope I can be like you. Sandra smiled. One day, I hope you'll be better than me. Brightway Solutions continued to grow under Daniel and Sandra's leadership. They launched a new mentorship initiative for underrepresented youth, offered scholarships in partnership with local universities, and ensured fair promotion policies for every staff level, from janitor to executive. We're not just building profits, Daniel told the board. We're building people. That phrase became the company's new motto. Staff morale soared, and job applications tripled in 6 months. Everyone wanted to work at the company where a woman had gone from cleaner to leader. Not because of pity but because of purpose. One quiet evening, Sandra and Daniel sat on their apartment balcony sipping warm tea. Do you ever think about how it all started? Sandra asked. Every day, Daniel said. One whispered warning changed everything. Sandra looked at him. Do you regret any part of it? Only one, he replied. That I didn't defend you that day in front of everyone. That I stayed silent. Sandra reached for his hand. But you listened. You investigated. And when it mattered most, you stood up. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. And now, I will never stay silent again. Not for anyone. That December, Daniel surprised Sandra with a gift. Inside a small box was a silver pendant with the word legacy engraved in fine script. Because that's what you've created here, he said. Not just for Brightway, but for every girl who's told she's not enough, for every woman passed over, and for every person cleaning floors with dreams locked inside them. Sandra held the pendant close to her chest. Her eyes filled with emotion. I didn't do it alone, she said. You opened the door. I just walked through it. Daniel shook his head. You didn't just walk through. You held the door open for others. That night, as Sandra placed the pendant around her neck and stood in front of the mirror, she realized something profound. Her story was no longer about survival, it was about transformation. Not just her own, but of everyone she touched. She had started in the shadows and now stood in the light, not because someone gave her a seat at the table, but because she dared to build one. As Daniel hugged her from behind and whispered, I'm proud of you, she whispered back. I'm proud of us. And outside, beneath the stars over Benue City, the lights of their office still glowed. Proof that truth, love, and courage could rewrite any story. Months later, Brightway Solutions was nominated for Africa's Most Ethical Corporation Award. The nomination came not just for financial transparency, but for the company's efforts in leadership diversity, staff empowerment, and youth development. During the award ceremony in Lagos, Daniel and Sandra were invited to speak. As Sandra took the podium, there was a long-standing ovation. I didn't rise because I was better, she said, her voice steady. I rose because someone listened, and I spoke when I could have stayed silent. We all have a role in changing the world, whether from a boardroom or a broom closet. Her words echoed through the hall like thunder. After the ceremony, journalists surrounded them. How does it feel to go from a janitor to vice president? One reporter asked. Sandra smiled and replied, I didn't change overnight. I've always been capable. The world just finally saw it. Another asked Daniel, what would you say to other CEOs who ignore the voices of junior staff? Daniel's reply was clear. You're not leading if you're not listening. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. The interview made headlines the next day. Sandra and Daniel, the power of listening. Back in Benue City, life settled into a beautiful rhythm. Daniel and Sandra started a foundation in Sandra's late mother's name, the Clara Hope Foundation, offering grants and training to women in underserved communities. They funded cleaning staff scholarships, sponsored entrepreneurial women, and held quarterly leadership workshops titled, From the Floor to the Future. Miriam became one of the foundation's lead coordinators, proudly advocating for healthcare access and education. She often told her story. I was healed because my sister was brave. Now I help others find their own healing. One afternoon, Sandra was invited to speak at Zambezi University, her alma mater. The same school that once celebrated her graduation now honored her with a special award in leadership and integrity. As she stood before hundreds of students, she told them, "Your title doesn't define your impact. Your choices do. Don't wait for permission to be great. Just start, wherever you are." After the speech, a group of young women surrounded her, crying and thanking her. One of them said, "I work night shifts cleaning offices. But seeing you here gives me hope." Sandra hugged her. "Hope is the beginning of everything. Don't let it go." That evening, Sandra returned home to find Daniel in the kitchen, cooking her favorite soup. "How was Zambezi?" he asked, stirring the pot. "Powerful," she replied. "Emotional. And necessary." They sat at the table, eating in silence, both reflecting. Then Daniel reached for her hand. "You know, we've done more than run a company. We've rewritten what success looks like." Sandra nodded. "Success with soul." Daniel smiled. "Exactly." Outside, the moon hung full and bright, as if blessing their journey. As the years passed, Sandra and Daniel remained a pillar of hope in their community. They never forgot where they came from. Every New Year's Eve, they visited Brightway's night staff, bringing gifts, food, and sitting with them in the break room. "Thank you for keeping the lights on," Daniel would say. "Your work matters." One year, a young man whispered to Sandra, "I used to think dreams were only for rich people. But you made me believe again." She squeezed his hand gently. "Then chase your dream. And when it scares you, run faster." Daniel's health took a brief hit one year, a minor heart scare that forced him to slow down. During his recovery, Sandra managed both the company and the foundation. She proved once again that her leadership wasn't tied to anyone's shadow. When Daniel returned, he found the business even stronger. "You didn't just hold things together," he said. "You elevated them." Sandra smiled and replied, "Because you built something worth protecting. I just did what you taught me, lead with heart." They embraced quietly. Knowing their partnership had grown beyond business or love, it had become legacy. When Sandra was invited to speak at an international women's summit in Nairobi, she hesitated at first. "I don't like fame," she told Daniel. "You don't need fame," he replied. "But the world needs your voice." She agreed. On stage, she shared her journey from a cleaning uniform to global leadership. Her final words stirred every woman in the room. "To every girl who's been overlooked, you are not invisible. Your time is coming. Prepare. Learn. Be ready. Because when the door opens, walk through, and leave it open for others." Back in Benue City, a statue was unveiled outside Brightway headquarters. A bronze figure of a woman holding a broom in one hand and a briefcase in the other. The plaque read, "Sandra Santos Miller." She saw, she spoke, she changed everything. As Sandra stood beside it with Daniel and Miriam, she wiped away a tear. "I didn't ask for any of this," she whispered. "But I'm grateful it found me." Daniel wrapped his arm around her. "No. You didn't wait for it to find you. You became it." And the crowd around them clapped, not for a CEO's wife or a company executive, but for a woman who dared to tell the truth. Years later, long after they both retired, Sandra sat on the same rooftop cafe where it all began. Now in her 60s, with silver strands in her hair, she watched the skyline of Benue City glow in the evening. A young girl approached her and said, Are you the woman from the stories? Sandra smiled. I suppose I am. My mum said you saved a company and changed everything, the girl said. Sandra leaned closer and replied, I just did what was right. And I hope one day you'll do the same. The girl grinned and ran off. And as the city lights flickered below, Sandra closed her eyes, knowing her story would live on, not just in books or speeches, but in every young woman who chooses courage over comfort.